is the GMologist, GM extraordinaire, the GMologist.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Geomologist Presents. Today, we're going to continue our ongoing series where Darkfluid teaches me Rolemaster. So, I will introduce Darkfluid. How's it going today?
Good, good.
Right. So, we've done two parts. Part one was, I guess, character law, more or less.
Yeah, character law, character creation, basic skills, how the basic roles of the system work, and
Yeah.
the concepts.
And part two was arms law, more or less.
Some rules of combat and how order of operation in combat, how the weapons and armor works, the damage systems, how all those roles take place.
All right. And today, we're going to tackle spell law.
Magic,
So,
magic.
and how magic works in Rolemaster. All right.
Yeah.
So,
I've been looking forward to this, Matt.
okay.
I like Roll Master's magic system. I really do.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it, right? Since being brought up in like D&D type games where right, it's Bayesian style magic, right? Fire and forget and rememorize for the most part,
hmm
right? I mean, other, I guess, they tried other things here and there and supplements, but it didn't really stick, right? And then when like D&D tried alternate systems like psionics, for example, I
hmm
mean, eventually 3.5 and Pathfinder just said, "Oh well, it's just another type of magic."
Another type of magic, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've tried different things over the years with D&D magic as well. I've tried spell point systems and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, I think the one of the other things that I don't want to say hinders. I play lots of D&D. I still like D&D magic,
Yeah,
but
me too. But I mean, it's
I
easy, right?
think it's still very much attached to all those old legacy spells. Is one of the
Mhm.
things about it, where, all of the classics that spells that everyone knows from D&D per level, and there's no real connection between any of them. They're all just one-off individual spells, and
Mhm.
so anything you do kind of has to fit within that framework, and everything people have tried kind of does. Even when you got to like 2E, where they try to do um, spheres for the priests
Right.
and different schools of magic. Really, what they were trying to do is retrofit and plug in all those old spells into that system to try to make it make sense and work. And
Mhm.
and I think that hindered that type of system because they never really were those spells weren't imagined and developed to be put in that type of system. So it never felt really um,
Mhm.
continuous. And even systems like Hyperborea, where, for example, you have pyromancers and cryomancers. They kind of do the same thing, and they've worked some new spells in to try and fix some of that short up. But that's something that I like about this system, and we'll talk about when we get to the spell list, because these really feel like each spell list is a specific realm of magic, and you are progressing and learning that realm of magic and advancing in it.
Cool.
So that's one
All
of the
right.
things I like about it.
Yep. All right. Well, let's shoot. Let's shoot at the basics and then go from there.
Okay. So first of all, your magic, a lot of your magic is determined by your profession, or, what would be your um, class.
Right.
There's a couple ways it affects things. So first of all, it determines what realm of power, as they say, you fall under, and that's essence, which is your classic magic user, and there's channeling, which is your classic priest, ecclesiastic, magic, and then mentalism, psionic type style magic, and they all run on the same system. So it's not like in D&D, like you talked about in the older school, where it's completely different systems. They are all similar systems. They all use the same magic system. There are rules to each ones that are slightly different, which we'll look at, and but they at least you have a unified system for resolving things for the most part.
Yep.
Not Some people might laugh at that once I start explaining how the system works. Um, but the other thing that it determines is what type of magic user you are, whether you're a pure magic user. These are magic users that these are the magic focused classes, and they are going to be there's three of those classes professions per the realm of magic. So three essence, three channeling, three mentalism. Each one has a slightly different tilt on it. And then there's hybrid magic users. These professions have access to two different realms of power. They're kind of split between two different realms.
Mhm.
And then there's semi magic users, spell users. They are mostly martial classes that have a little bit of magic to
Okay.
them. Things like a bard or a ranger. And then there's what would be considered martial classes, non-magic users. Those are fighter, thief, rogue, warrior, monk, those things. They keep in mind they may be called non-spell users, but they can still learn some magic. And if we call back to that first one, we did that first show we did, we talked about how you acquire skills and spend development points, and each class has a different cost for acquiring different skills. And one of those is the learning of spell lists. And obviously, it's cheaper for the pure magic users than it is for others, and it goes up in cost till you get to something like a fighter, where it's very expensive. So that's one thing that holds them back. The other is the fact that they're considered a non-magic user, and because of that, they're limited in the spell lists they can learn, and we'll explain how that works now.
Mhm. Okay.
So you have three different types of spell lists. They're all classified three different ways, whether they be essence, channeling, mentalism. They all use this classification within that. There are base spell lists. Okay. Base spell lists are assigned per profession. So any of those magic using classes are going to have some base lists. Those are lists that are going to be named for that profession. So they will be, for example, they will be a cleric spell list or a lay healer or mentalist spell list. They will be assigned to the astrologer class. And those base spell lists um, are obviously considered to be uh, assigned to those specialties. And because of that, they will be able to learn any of the spells in that spell list all the way to the top of the spell list. There are closed spell lists. Closed spell lists in each of the types of magic, essence, channeling, or mentalism. So pure spell users, those ones that are considered in that pure section of essence, channeling, or mentalism, they can learn any of those closed lists. Hybrid spell users can also learn closed lists, but when you start talking to them, they won't be able to learn all of the spells in that list. And then non-spell users and semi-spell users can never get access to those lists, period. And then finally, we have the third type, which is open spell lists. Open spell lists are available to any profession, including semi and non-spell users. They can get access to those lists. However, they will be limited in what they can learn. The way that you learn spell lists, and when you look at a spell list, it'll be in a complete realm of magic. For example, it'll be bone ways, which is for healing bone injuries, or it will be, I believe it's I'm gonna misquote some here, like fire ways, which will be all of those fire elemental spells. And it's going to be any spells between level one and uh, level level one, and depending on the spell list, generally up to level 50. Um, However, one of the things to understand is that spell lists won't necessarily, depending on the list, have a spell per level. Sometimes you don't get another spell in that list for 5 levels, you know. It all just depends on the spell list. And the way you learn whenever you spend development points and make a spell roll to learn a list is you learn it in chunks at a time. So, um, a really common way that pure spell users start out is they will learn 1 through 10. So if you make a successful roll to learn that spell list, you know it up to the 10th spell level. And then if you want to learn the next level, 10 through 20, you have to go through and put more development points in and make a roll to learn the next 10 spells on that list. Okay. And then the final portion is everything level 25 and above. And that's that third section that you learn for pure spell users. And this is where it starts to get important on whether that's a base list, a closed list, or an open list. Because even if you have access to it, if you're not a pure spell user, let's say you're a hybrid spell user, if you're trying to learn a closed list, so if you're a pure spell user, you can still learn it in the same manner as your base list, 1 through 10, 10 through 20. And
Okay.
everyone can learn their base lists, 1 through 10, 10 through 20 in those sections. Uh, Pure spell users learn it the same way, 1 through 10, 10 through 20. However, if you're a hybrid, you can only learn it 1 through 5, and then you have to learn 5 through 10, and you're limited to that 10th level spell is the highest you can go. And then on the open lists, the hybrids can only learn 1 through 10, but they learn it in that one section, 1 through 10 at a time. And then this is where you get into the semi-spell users and the non-spell users. And to remember, they can only access the open lists, but they learn those level 1 through 5 at a time. And then if you're a non-spell user like a fighter, that's all you get, 1 through 5. And then the semi-spell users can also then try and attempt to learn the open spell list at 5 through 10.
Okay.
So I know that's a lot to deal with, but just know that everybody can learn their base list 10 spells at a time, 10 levels at a time. And then uh, once you get into closed lists and open lists, it starts to be reduced if you're not a pure spellcaster.
Okay.
The other thing that pure spellcasters have going for them is at character creation, they get to select any other 4 lists within their realm. So if they're an essence user, anything in the essence realm, channeling anything in channeling, mentalism, anything in mentalism, you can take any 4 spell lists at the time of character creation and note those down. And those also then become base lists for you as a pure spellcaster. So they get even more access to even more spells and get to represent them as base lists, which means they can learn those highest spell levels. They do they by default that does include um, other classes base lists. So what does that mean for those people who aren't familiar with the classes? Because we never did go over every single class since there's so many in Rolemaster. That would mean for something where for someone who's not used to Rolemaster, just to name a couple classes that might make a little more sense, we'll just take two essence spell users. We'll take magicians and illusionists. They have different sets of base lists. By the rules, a magician can take 4 of the illusionist base lists and make them his own base list too. But it says right in the rule book that even though it's allowed, they really strongly suggest that as a GM, you say, don't take another class's base list, please. Yeah.
Yeah.
In other words, just specialize in one of the other open or closed lists that are generic to the realm. And I think it's mostly for flavor and uh, role preservation and protection. Um, so you know, but it does leave it open so that you as a GM, if you think it's okay for them to take one of them, it makes sense for their character, or they don't want you feeling like that's something that's just completely out of line.
Mhm. Okay.
How do you cast? Let's see.
Yeah, how do you cast? That was being my next question here.
So the first thing is if you know a spell list. Let's say you know a spell list, you're a pure magic user and you know it from level 1 to 10, and you're a second level character. You can't cast spells at fifth level, even though you know them. You can still, like D&D, only cast to second level on that list. Well, I'll take that back. Not like D&D, because obviously spell progression in D&D doesn't match level progression. In this game, level progression and spell progression match exactly. So if there's 10 spells on the list, levels 1 through 10, you're a second level magic user, you can cast up to second level. Third, you get to third level. Fourth, you can cast the fourth level spell and below on that list. On and any of the lists you know. So the spell progression, as far as levels go, matches your uh, caster's level. In addition, you have PowerPoints, and typically uh, the PowerPoint cost is the same as the spell level. So first level spell will cost 1 PowerPoint, second level spell will cost 2 PowerPoints, etc. And then in addition to that, you have to prepare the spell, cast the spell, and on casting, make a roll to cast. So you not only have the concept of spell levels, you have the concept of PowerPoints that you have to spend, which limits your daily casting ability. And then you have a roll to cast for success, which will limit the spell's ability to go off and can modify the results of the spell. And those are the main things to know about how you cast before we start getting into too much detail.
Mhm.
Um, when it comes to PowerPoints, if you remember correctly, those are derived from your stats. Each realm has a stat associated with it. There's 3 realms, 3 stats. And that table where you got your development points and your stat bonus, there's also a column on there for power points. So you just take the what your stat is that you rolled, look across the column, and that's the number of power points you get per level. So if it says um, 2 PowerPoints, for example, and your third level, you're going to get 6 PowerPoints that you can cast with.
Okay. So you can cast any number of spells that you have access to as long as they fall within those points or cost that many points. Is that how that works? And is it
Yeah,
still
you
like
can cast.
okay?
So
And
let's
you
say
don't
you're a,
if you fail a okay, if you fail a spell, you can still cast it later, or is there any consequence?
the consequences will depend on the spell failure itself.
Okay.
So um, we can get into that once we go into how the dice roll works. Um, and and the results of that. Uh, but let's put it this way. Um, if you don't get the spell off, for example, during preparation, um, you lose the spell. You don't lose any power points.
Okay.
Um, however, if you are making your spell roll, um, it depends on the failure itself. Kind of like when we talked about skills. Can you do something again? Well, it depends on how bad your spell failure is, right? So, but before we get to the spell rolls, let's go into a few other things about casting and how it works. We had talked about the order of operations in combat
Okay.
previously, and remember, spells come right at the top of the list. Okay, before anything happens. Now,
Do you have to declare, or is that
yeah, you do. Yeah, in Rollmaster, you declare what you're doing,
okay?
and this is what takes a lot of people aback by Rollmaster is a lot of the magic is slow, much slower than what you are used to with something like a D&D. there are three different classes of spells in Rolemaster, and it's based on the level of the spell and the level of the caster. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, so you start with class three spells. They're going to be your slowest. So that is essentially two levels equal to your level or two levels less. So if you're a third level caster, you have nothing but class three spells. You have your level three spells, your level two spells, and your level one spells. Those take three combat rounds. Okay. 2 rounds for preparation and the third round to cast. And during that casting round, the effects take place. And they take place at the beginning of the round during that spell resolution, before any missile weapons or anything else. You have class two spells, which are anything from essentially from four less than your spell. So it's three, four, and five. Sorry, I had to get that math in right in my head.
All right.
So you essentially get your first class two when you go to fourth level, right? Your at fourth level, your first level spells are class two. And so spells that are 4, 5, and 6 levels less than you take 1 round of prep and 1 round to cast. And then you get class one spells, and that's starting at 6 spell levels less than you. Anything 6 spell levels less than you and below, so seventh level spellcaster casting a first level spell, those take no preparation. The round you declare it, you cast it, and the effects take place. There are some spells that are marked as instantaneous spells, and those act automatically like uh, class one spells. Spell preparation. So during those rounds that you're prepping, it takes 90% of the caster's activity, which essentially means you can what move 10%, two very
Yeah.
minor things, but you're not going to be parrying, running around. And
Okay.
then the level, the round that you end up casting is 75% of your activity that round.
Okay.
Um, One of the things that I get asked, and it's not very clear, I don't think in RM2, and I might be missing it, it's clearer in some other versions, is what happens, what happens if you get hit or whatever. And it's pretty much the same as some spells require concentration to maintain. It's pretty much the same as concentration. Um, the rules are while you're concentrating to maintain a spell or while you're prepping slash casting a spell, one thing is no other spells can be cast during that period. Um, and you it only breaks your concentration or your preparation is only broken if the caster is either dropped, knocked unconscious, stunned, or killed. And in that case, just just like I said earlier, you don't lose any of the power points. The spell just never gets completes. And also, since I mentioned concentration and we're talking about percentage of activity, while you're concentrating on maintaining a spell, it's 50% of your activity for the round. So you can take 50% of your movement.
Okay.
You could parry, but you get a negative 50 to your offensive bonus, so you're only going to get half of that to try and to try and parry or anything like that.
Hmm. Okay. So you can still kind of do stuff, but the focus is going to be on spell casting, clearly.
Correct, correct.
So it seems pretty straightforward.
It's pretty straightforward, but here's where we get the little um, kink in things, and there's the details. So the the first thing I'll go ahead and say real quick, because I don't know if we covered it earlier, because it's something people ask about. It's like what about armor and things like that?
Hmm.
Um, so Essence spellcasters can't wear armor. Um, it it uh, without optional rules. It inhibits the spell casting. Channeling, they can wear armor, but they can't wear metal. which is a little different from something like D&D. So you can wear things that are organic, leather, rigid plates based on animals, stuff like that. Uh,
Okay.
you know, obviously like a dragon scale or something. If you're really high level, it'd be something really cool to get. Sort of almost like the druid thing from D&D, where you can only wear natural armors.
Yeah. Okay.
And then mentalists can wear any armor, they just can't wear any helmet. So there are three types of there are three types of spell casting roles when it goes to resolving your spells. Non-attack spells, non-attack rolls, base attacks, and then elemental attacks. Elemental attacks are it's the spell lists are things like the fireways, things like that, water. Those have a very special. Those are resolved differently because the way that they deem those is that you aren't attacking people directly with them. Like you're
Hmm.
not attacking them with a magic effect, their bodies. What you're doing is it's almost like when you get into 2E and you start getting into invocation with lightning bolts and things where you are creating something in the world that's an actual physical manifestation that's a physical attack on them. That's the reason they have those elemental attack
Okay.
separate. So you create fire that burns them. You create electricity that shocks them. It's not like a normal, magical attack spell where you are attacking their body directly with the magic itself.
All right. And that's just
So
they roll to manifest a spell. And is there a second thing like to hit then or
yeah, we'll talk about that. It works a lot like combat.
okay.
The elemental. It works a lot like combat, including taking things like armor into effect. Combat.
Okay.
Uh, the armor comes into effect on all spells too,
Hmm.
because that's the other thing. Remember, I said how metal they say inhibits and helmets inhibit mentalists.
Yeah.
They kind of take that into account from the defender too, because if you're wearing metal armor, it affects the role of the caster if the target's wearing metal armor.
Okay.
Mentalist if the target's wearing a helmet. But this is one of the things, like a lot in Rolemaster, you don't have to necessarily, there's not, in that case, there's not necessarily a the numerical penalty. Remember, they actually have a column on the chart for the
Hmm.
target.
Okay.
So for non-attack spells, um, it's I kind of look at this almost maybe for me it's easier to remember it like the movement and maneuver versus static maneuver,
Yeah.
where the non-attack spells are much simpler. So uh, non-attack spells, you you make a uh, you make a roll, and it's pretty easy that it's zero through the zero through or one through two, it fails. 3 through 100, it succeeds. It's
Okay.
just that simple. Um, and if the roll is a failure, you make an open-ended roll on the spell failure
Okay.
table and see what your failure results in.
Huh, 2% chance, generally speaking. There's no modifiers to that or
Yeah, in most cases there's not. Um, there are some special circumstances for a lot of spells that they're always called out in the spell description. If there's anything, if there's anything that is non-standard, anything special defensive or anything like that. And then for your base attack spells, you're going to do the same thing. 1 through 2 unmodified fails. And this is where we get interesting. This is where we start combining that idea like a natural 20 in D&D. A 96 through 100 unmodified succeeds with a special result. Um, in this case, the special result is just um, it's a it's a high modifier to the resistance roll.
okay.
And then a 3 through 95, if you roll on the dice, you add all your modifiers up to it, both positive and negative, and then you check the table. But this is what's interesting. It's capped. So it's capped on the bottom end. by a 3 and on the top end by a 95. So that's because the table just goes from 1 to 100. And remember, the top and bottom of that table are reserved for unmodified natural rolls only, right? So if it falls anywhere else in the spectrum, you get to add modifiers, but the highest you're going to get is a 95, the lowest you're going to get is a 3.
Okay.
Um, and then for after that base attack roll, you're going to have you're going to get a resistance roll, which is like the saving throw in D&D. So the base attack spell table is interesting too because once you take that roll, modified or unmodified, you go and cross-reference it on the attack table. And there's a column for general, which is if none of these apply really. And then there's actually two columns for essence, two for channeling, and two for mentalism. Okay. And the two columns under each one have to do with the armor that the target is wearing. For essence, you use one column if they're wearing metal armor, another if they're using leather armor. Okay. No armor, use the general column. Same thing for channeling. You have metal armor or just a metal shield.
Hmm.
And then on mentalism, it's metal helmet or leather helmet. And
Or
any other
no
in
helmet,
any
yeah.
yeah, if any cases they're not using either of those, you use the general column. And so um when you cross-reference that chart, it'll either give you a failure, right? Or it will give you a number, and that's a negative or positive number. And what that number is that number is the modifier to the target's resistance roll. Okay. They then go on to the resistance roll chart, and that it's actually a table, and that table has the target's level and the spellcaster's level, right? You cross-reference that, and it gives you the target number for your resistance roll. Whatever that
Hmm.
target number is, then you modify by the number of that attack table result. So let's say that when you in that base attack table, you made your spell roll, you cross-reference on the table, and it says that that the defender is going to get a uh, 15 penalty. So when you cross-reference the resistance roll, if it says they got to roll a 50, well, now they got to roll a 65. And to me, I'll just say this. To me, this is the most clunky part of the system. It's not terrible when you get used to it, but if I was playing a big long campaign, I would consider house ruling this to make it simpler.
Okay.
And there are some other systems. There's one other system in particular that I think has finally fixed this. I don't think any of the Roll Master versions I've seen did a great job, particularly fixing this, but we can talk about that later. Um, and so that's base attack roll. This base attack roll, unlike the non-attack spell roll, it also has modifiers that you can apply. Um, you add the level of the caster to it if they're a pure or hybrid spellcaster. You also can modify for range. You can modify for cover, or if you have some sort of special item that makes your magic more potent, things like that. Just like an attack roll, a combat attack roll with melee or missile, there are a few modifiers that you can add to that roll. There's only a handful of them, though.
Okay.
And again, spell failure means that you then go to the spell failure table, make a um, make an open-ended roll, and see what happens. And this is where results can get interesting. Um, we'll look at those here in a little bit, but um, what happens, you would say, if they make their saving throw? It's just like D&D, depends on the spell description. Sometimes nothing happens to them. Sometimes they take half. So it's all gonna depend on the spell. And then also, I will note here that on non-elemental attacks, there can still be some criticals on spells, but that's listed in the spell description. And it's typically you're not going to see it where it's like if your spell base attack spell casting roll is above a certain amount, you score critical. It's usually just if the spell co goes off, depending on the level of spell or the caster, they're going to take an A electrical critical or something like that. It's not based on the how high you roll. The how high you roll on a success is only on a base attack spell is really going to only modify the difficulty of the resistance roll by the defender.
Okay.
So now we get
Hmm.
into elemental attacks.
All right. Now elemental attacks.
Yeah. Oh, another thing I'll say is on these spells, typically you get your stat bonus as well on these attack rolls as a caster for your relevant casting stats. So it just depends on the. No, I take that back. You only get it on your resistance roll, but it's not like an attack roll. It's much simpler than that because the bonuses and penalties are limited. So, elemental attacks. This is where things get interesting. This is where you start to get a lot of different modifiers. Things like, are they wearing armor? Are they, do they have cover? Those sort of things. And there's also area of effect spells, which are a little different here too, which we'll talk about that in a second. Things like a fireball. So,
Okay.
elemental attack rolls. You make an open-ended roll to cast the spell. Okay. You check the table, and if it's an unmodified 1 through 2, it's automatic failure. If it's 96 through 100, for area effect spells, you get a very severe attack result. Um, and if you get a uh, natural 100 on non-area effect spells, these are things that are like lightning bolt, then that indicates a really high severe attacks, as they say, result. If the unmodified is uh, is not in that area, then you're going to go through uh, and treat it as a an open-ended roll, and you're going to add modifiers to it. So modifiers. This is where you can start to add different things. You get to add your agility to it as though it was a missile weapon. Um, you get to add your level. And then you get to add the different negatives or positives for range and shields and helmets, cover and position, things like that, like you would for a missile attack. But there's one
Cool.
other special thing for these. This is where we go back to that special skill called a directed skill bonus. So you can spend development points for a skill in a specific spell if it's one of these. And
To
it's
kind of like
just
specialize in a spell. Is that what
Yeah,
you're
it's kind of like your weapon skills, where your weapon skills, you don't spend them, remember, in like one-handed weapons. You spend them in short sword, right? So in here, you wouldn't spend it in like in like the uh fireways list. You would spend it for fire bolt for that one spell. You're very good at that spell. And you get to add your skill ranks in that to your roll. Um, Now, there's also a special rule for area effect spells, and that's where they have a radius, and you don't add to that. Uh, you don't add to that your agility bonus as the caster or your skills, and also the defenders don't get to add a shield bonus uh, well as a negative modifier either. All the other normal modifiers apply. And then there is a uh, additional plus 20 modifier for anybody who's right center in the dot, so to speak, of the area of effect. Um, so people out on the edge, uh, while they don't get an extra bonus to resist, they or avoid it. The person in the center gets the negative, essentially. And then they say that GMs, it's kind of up to the GM if they only want to roll once for everybody underneath it, or if they do want to do a separate roll for each individual target underneath. That's kind of up to the GM. So uh, again,
Interesting. Yeah.
again,
Okay.
if you fail, open-ended roll on the fail table, and then if you hit, like I said, remember this one. It's more like a normal weapon attack roll. It's an open-ended roll. If you don't hit 100 exactly, or if you don't hit that bottom failure range, or the 96 to 100 exactly. And when you look at the results on these tables, they look just like a weapon table. You have on the left what your elemental casting roll result was, and then across the top you have armor types. So you actually compare it just like a missile weapon, where reference their armor type, look at the roll, and it's going to give you damage and a crit. So, you know, 10 hits and a C ice critical. Um, and just like some of the really high level crits on weapons, where you might get a secondary crit, like you might do a slashing crit and a secondary crush crit. These are the same way, where um, you might get a cold crit, and then you get a secondary impact crit, things like that if they go high enough.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like I mean, when it gets to the resolution of what these spells can do or what might happen, I think that gets to I think everyone loves to roll on these crit tables, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah, and the failures are great too, because uh, like I said, it depends what happens. For example, strain causes caster to lose spell, but not the spell points.
hmm,
So
okay.
um, you get, you spell strays and travels to a point unknown, proves useless. Caster is stunned for 3 rounds. The fun ones are you get really high and casters start having strokes, or any failure that starts with the phrase "caster internalizes spell" is always a fun result. Usually take hits, you're knocked down, unable to function for an hour. When you get to the higher level ones, you're out of action for weeks. It really gets pretty bad. But again, these are really low percentage incidents, because you not only have to fail your spell, you also then have to roll sufficiently high on the spell failure table. Um, One thing I'll say at this point is that there's optional rules, and I see them used fairly frequently. Um, they're Because they add some elements that casters frequently are asking for, especially casters coming from other game systems. Uh, and I'm going to touch on just a few of those. Um, the the main thing is what's called extraordinary spell failure. Sounds like why would casters want to run with extraordinary spell failure? Um, and the reason is because it gives you options. The number one option I'll just put up there that I see people want to use, although there's several. I'll just I'll put them in order. Uh, Not all of these are necessarily in what order I see more used most often, but casting without preparation is a big one, because remember how it's slow to cast spells. 3 rounds when you're a low level spellcaster. And uh, I see people want to do that. They want to skip a round or two. And the other things, you can wear armor. Armoring adds to this. Casting above your level, trying to overcast, casting when you don't have free hands and things like that. Casting from a list you can't normally learn from. I don't see that very often. So I see that a lot with people who want to speed up spell preparation. And I can explain without going into too much detail what all of the different ESF things do is they just add they just have a modifier. So, for example, using one less round to prepare than you normally would require is 25. Two less rounds prepared is 50. And all of the modifiers add up, right? And so the way it works in Rollmaster 2 is you take all of those modifiers and you add them up, right? And then you make an open-ended roll against it. If you roll above it, then you make your normal spell casting roll after that. If you roll below it, then you fail and you make an open-ended spell failure roll and you add 3 times the total ESF penalties that you added up to the spell failure critical result. So you're really risking a lot. Um, but it's 2 rolls, and we can talk about that later when we talk about some of the other systems. I think there's a better way to do it. Um, the other thing is there are rules in spell law for magic item creation. Uh, the spell lists, right out of the bat, there are spell lists specifically for creating magic items, and all the different things that in some other systems they're like, oh, you've kind of come up with some costs and do. They're right out there. Like, how do you enchant an item? How do you do spell storing? There's spell lists for all of that. There's a class. There's a profession called alchemist, which does a ton of this stuff. They make items. That's what they do.
Oh, cool.
Um,
Okay.
yeah.
But are
And
they
there's
really spellcasters or is it more like
they are
skills?
spellcasters. They
Okay.
are spellcasters. They even have a spell list for creating items, like so that you
Ah,
wouldn't have
okay.
to forge them. You know.
All right, so like no feats or talents or whatever. It's like this is a spell to create
Yeah, and this
item
this
types
this
of
spell
X.
imbues a sword with a +5. This one does a +15. That sort of thing.
Okay,
So,
nice.
um, there's also some other things in the spellcasting system we haven't touched on yet.
Hmm.
One of them is runes. Runes is a skill for reading runes, and then there's also a magic list for creating runes. And think of runes like scrolls
Okay.
in D&D. Um, there's they uh, they work in a similar fashion. There there's entire spell lists just for creating runes, magical runes that can store spells and cast them. Another thing that's pretty important that I probably should have touched on during the PowerPoint section is there's 2 main magical items that magic users can get to assist in their spell casting. Uh, there are what's called spell adders and PowerPoint multipliers. They both work in a very different way, and depending on how they're used and what level you are, they can be more powerful in certain situations. So spell adders will usually give you X number of additional spells you can cast a day. And it's really straightforward on most of those. If you got a +1 spell adder, you can cast one additional spell that day of any of the spells that you know and are able to cast. So first level spell, you can use it for a third level spell. If you can cast a fourth level spell, you can use that to cast your fourth level spell. Cost you no power points. PowerPoint multipliers do kind of just like what they sound like. If you have a 2 times PowerPoint multiplier, you get double the PowerPoints a day to use for casting. 3 times is 3 times the PowerPoints. And so depending on your situation, they're all good, but depending on your situation, it's obviously a multiplier it can be really good for if you've got high level of PowerPoints. Spell adders can be great. If you don't have as many, especially early on, you get a +3 spell adder. That's pretty powerful because they work differently. Double the PowerPoints might not get you many PowerPoints if you're a low PowerPoint character. Whereas a spell adder you can use to, what's the cost, when you're at level 20 of casting a single 20th level spell with a, spell adder, right? So it all is just dependent. But those are the 2 main types of caster enhancing devices that you commonly see for to enhance casting. Foci, spell foci, so to speak, in other systems.
All right.
Um, And so one of the things I'll say, and without, we can look at a couple spell lists, for example. Um, when it comes to like healing, this is where healing feels a lot different than other systems. Because remember, in this system, you have hits and you have injuries, broken bones, things like that. And they're two different things. So your healing spell lists um, are broken up in things like blood law, nerve law, muscle law, organ law, bone law. Um, and each of those only focuses on healing injuries to those specific systems. Um, and then there's a separate list called concussion ways, which is typically for healing hits, uh, quote unquote hit
Oh,
points, right?
interesting. Okay. I mean, I guess it's
So,
more minutia. I mean, there's not like well, that, but then again, right? That's the nature of the game, right? When it comes to
mhm.
injuries, right? You get those kind of things from the crit tables, so you want to have something that can take care of them. Although I guess you could,
it
I mean,
can it can
they don't have, I
be
guess they didn't want to just a single healing spell.
Yeah, it can be frustrating. I think this if you're not used to this type of system in the beginning. But one thing
Hmm.
to remember is that when you're if you're especially you're a pure magic user, you're learning the first 10 levels. So by level 3 or 4, how many spell lists do you know? Right?
Okay.
So while it may seem like, wow, man, I can only what happens to get a broken bone? Well, remember that by the time you know 4 or 5 of these lists, potentially 50 spells, right? So you have all the spells in that list up to level 10. So you can really start to group things, and it's not as bad as it seems. Uh, when it comes to essence spells, though, we'll talk like an elemental spell. I always go like to go to fire
Yeah.
first. Um, you get Firebolt at level 6, which is a bolt of fire shot at a target from your hand, and you get Fireball at level 8. I'll just say those because something like Fireball is very um, familiar to like a D&D player. And the thing about it is, you have got all the way up to level 8, you've got spells, boil liquid, warm solids, uh, wood fires, cause uh, any wood to ignite and burn, wall of fire, heat solids, firebolt, call flame, uh, which call flame is kind of a creates a cube of flame and deals heat criticals. Uh, and so it continues to go up that way all the way to level 25. And the way that a lot of spell lists work in Rolemaster is they they may seem kind of uh, repetitive and uninteresting, but the way they work is they increase incrementally. So like your healing ones, you're going to be doing the same thing. It's just after a couple levels, it's going to go from healing a minor fracture to a major fracture. 10 hits to 20 hits. And there may be different ones in between that do something subtly different, like doesn't heal it instantly, but causes it regenerate faster or increase the healing faster. So you get different effects in between. Um, that kind of offset you waiting for that next cure light wounds, cure moderate wounds, so to speak. And the same thing with fire. Um, an example is you might have a repeated spells. You get a 6th level firebolt, you get an 11th level firebolt, which is the same as the 6th level, except the range goes triple. You get triple the range on it. And a lot of spells go that way going up. The thing I like about it is if you're going with a thematic mage, like this guy's going to be all fire spells and things like that. He loves fire. You can really focus on that, and it feels like you are actually progressing in your mastery of fire. Whereas like D&D, the spells are just ad hoc all over the place. At later versions, like and in things like Hyperborea, like I talked about, they tried to like group these spells in a way. But because the spells themselves were never made to be progressive, there's holes, they're unrelated. It doesn't really feel like you're progressing. It just feels like you're learning random spells and random formula. And some people might like that feel, but I one of the things I like about this is it feels like you're actually progressing you're learning things, you're deepening your knowledge of a specific subject and mastery of that realm of magic. And I like that feel. I don't see this in most other role-playing games. They're either like a collection of independent spells or they're more of like a uh, verb, adjective, or free form magic system, where you describe your effect and then you kind of work with the GM to see if that nebulous effect happens.
That sounds cool. Yeah, I mean, definitely would like to see it in practice at some point, but maybe that's better served in like a actual play type of thing, or at least a test play type of thing.
Yeah, because um, you really need to read through the spell lists
Yeah,
to get a feel for what you're doing and how the system kind of works together. It's pretty straightforward. It's nothing mysterious. It's just you don't understand how they've got them broken up or what kind of casters do what until you go and look through them. Um, but it's a really neat system in that I like it also from a GM perspective because if you're wanting to customize your system, because they're succinct enough, you can, and because the system is already built around learning them up to a certain level, if you're doing a custom class or you have a world where you don't want to do certain types of magic, you just say you just go and pick the list, and you're pretty safe without reading the whole list to say like, hey, these are the spell lists that are allowed, right? Just from the title, right? And if you really have a problem with one of them, you can just say, and I didn't go into it, but they actually classify that level 1 through 10, 1 through 5 is with a letter. It's like A, B, C. You can just say, hey, you can learn these up to, level 10 in this list, and that's it. If you're shooting for a specific type of low magic scenario or things like that.
mhm,
And it might just be me. It just might be the way my mind works. I find that really easy rather than going through like a traditional D&D and then having to read each individual spell and then list out each individual spell that I'm going to allow, that sort
right.
of thing.
Well, they seem to like
Um,
build upon one another, right?
And as a spellcaster, in some ways, it takes some of the stress off. You're not like, okay, I'm going to gain another spell this level. Now, which one do I choose? You're like, no,
I just add to,
yeah, am I going to learn a spell list or am I going to progress this list further? Because that list I've already learned, like I've already decided I'm going to go into bone mastery. I've already decided I'm going to learn fire.
mhm,
My fire is going to continue to progress up until level 10 without me spending any more development points. Is there something else I want to go specialize in? Is there something else I want to, get access to?
right.
So I think that covers the basics of how magic works. I mean, I don't want to go into too much more detail because we can go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, cool. So I guess we're going to go on to the next thing, which is adjacent games or games that are adjacent to Rolemaster and
Hmm.
your
Hmm.
or my experience with them. But first, we have a message, and I think it's a good segue for this topic because it is pertinent to that sort of adjacent type of game. So this is a message from Joe Richter of Hindsightless. I'm sure you've listened to his
Hmm.
most sporadic podcast ever podcast. He's given some good stuff lately and talked about some books and I know those are fun things to tackle. I don't know if you've ever read that book, Kings of the Wild. I don't know if you've ever read.
No, I haven't read that one.
It's a good book. It's a really nice book. And then they it's supposed to be like a trilogy, but it's really worth reading, especially it's especially if you're into like music and especially if you're into gaming. It's kind of neat. Anyway, all right. Well, here's his message, and then we'll respond.
Yo, what's up, Carl? I know it's been a long time since I've left you a message, but I've still been out here listening. And I wanted to say I just got finished listening to you and Dark Fluid's first episode of him going through Rollmaster with you. And I thought it was really, really awesome, man. Like the whole time I'm sitting there listening, and it's just bringing me back memories. Even though we mostly played MERP and we just added stuff from Rollmaster into MERP, but just hearing him talk about, PowerPoints and all that stuff, I was like, oh man, I love this system. It was really good. I don't know if MERP is different or if we were just doing a homebrew rule, but I don't remember us ever using the rule where you could only buy one rank per level. Maybe we did, but I seem to remember having multiple skill ranks and not being in one skill and not being a super high level. But that might be a MERP thing. And like I said, we mostly played MERP, so I could be misremembering. But you mentioned that Nerds of the Ring channel. That channel's really fun, man. They do a lot of those what if this certain thing happened in Middle Earth. And I think they do a lot of research and they seem like they kind of have a good grasp on Middle Earth and they always come up with cool ideas. So yeah, that was a good shout out for that show. It would be fun and interesting to play in a world where Gandalf took the One Ring. Because for me, I can't imagine because the two are just intertwined without any hope of separation of playing Merp or Rollmaster not in Middle Earth. We only played it in Middle Earth. I think I can only play it in Middle Earth. Like I know they have their own setting, but we never used it at all. So awesome stuff, man. I think you just released part two of that discussion with Dark Fluid. It's always great to hear from Dark Fluid. So that was really cool to have him on. Great stuff. Anyway, that's enough for me. I love Merp and Rollmaster, but mostly Merp, but also Rollmaster. Take it easy. Peace out.
Cool. So lot to process there. I don't know what you want to take first.
Yeah, I will say that I've watched that YouTube series too, and it's pretty entertaining.
Yeah, I
They're
would
really good.
actually, if I were to run something in Middle Earth, I would love to run, what if Gandalf had taken the ring? And I'd be tempted to use against the Dark Master, right? Because it's
Hmm.
more generic, and then people wouldn't be like, oh, this goes against canon. Yeah, it's my own thing. Or
Yeah,
you could use straight Roll Master instead of Merc. But I think against the Dark Master is, you know, serial numbers filed off, so I think that could work pretty well. And
yeah,
still
and
key capture that Rollmaster Merc feel.
yeah, and we'll talk about some of those adjacent systems. I think it's like Joe, you don't remember incorrectly. MERP is different in that regard, and we'll get into that. So, what order to take these in? I'll just say that I don't know that much about um, RMSS or Rollmaster Fantasy. Those two that came after Rollmaster 2, I just don't know that much about them. They might have some of the things, the changes that I'm about to talk about with MERP. I'll just get that out there and say I know they changed the combat initiative some, uh, and the action economy, so to speak. Um, but I think that they change. I think, as far as I know, RMSS at least is very similar to what I'm going to go into next, which I'll just go right into this to say Rollmaster Classic. It was released after MERP, after those other two, early 2000s. I think it was released. I'm going to see if I can look my reference just in 2007 was when it was released. Um, and I hadn't looked at it a lot in the past, but in preparations for some of these calls, I was like, I'm going to go dig into it a little bit. I know that some people have mentioned it before, and I just never had enough time because I guess being the old grognard, I was like, I got Rollmaster 2. What do I need all these other ones for? I really like Rollmaster Classic. In fact, I would say it's probably better than Rollmaster 2. It's really similar to Rollmaster 2, but just a lot of it's laid out better. It's clearer. Um, the way they changed the combat order, because I remember when we were doing Arms Law, I said that whole the way they do percentage of actions can get really complicated. Uh, they kind of keep that. They give actions each a percentage, and then what they do is they make everything a short and a long action. Then you no longer have uh, missile weapon phase and all those different phases. It's a short action phase, which is any action that's less than 50% activity, and then a long action movement, and then a long action phase, which is anything over 50% activity. And then if you got enough, take another short action. Uh, for some people, that may be great. They might like that. It's more straightforward. To me, it's you still got to keep track of what percentage the action takes. And I like maybe it's just me in my current phase of my role playing career, but I kind of like phased activity now. I'm into like you know basic D&D Hyperborea style phases in the round. I like that. So I kind of like keeping the phases. And there's some other games that we'll talk about. I think against the Dark Master might be the way I like this to run now. But um, everything else is very similar. I think by default they add 2d 10 plus your quickness bonus as the initiative. That's a big change. But one thing I really like that they do in Rolemaster Classic is remember I was talking about spells where you make that extraordinary spell failure roll. Then if you don't fail, you make another roll for your casting. You can still fail that roll normally. I think what they do makes much more sense. They still have an ESF. The bonuses are all pretty much the same. But what they do is they say just take that whatever that ESF modifier is, add it to the spell failure range for your normal spell roll, and make your spell roll. That's it. If you succeed, you cast your spell. If it fails, then do the whole three times the ESF modifier added to an open-ended spell failure roll and see what the result is. So it really takes that unnecessary two roll thing and just combines it. And even if I was rolling Rollmaster 2, that's the way I would do it, just to combine it and make it in one roll. So Rollmaster Classic is great. It's still all pretty much Rollmaster 2, just for the most part cleaned up a little, a few things like that were easier as one roll. They change it to clean that up and it's better laid out. I think that would be the way to go for most people now because my understanding is Rollmaster Classic's still on sale. You still buy it through Drive-Thru RPG right now. If you're going to
Okay.
play Rollmaster 2, that's something that's available. Rollmaster Express, I think, sadly, is probably the best intro to Rollmaster for most people if you want to just check out the system and see what it's about. And I say sadly because it's no longer for sale. I don't know anywhere you can get it.
Which one is that
Um,
one?
Rollmaster Express.
Okay.
And it was essentially Rollmaster Classic chopped down, even more so than MERP, which people often talk about. It has fewer tables, a lot fewer tables. They just combine tables. Skills are learned with variable costs, just like Rollmaster, but there's just fewer skills, so it's simpler. Uh, they do flat development points per each character per level instead of it being determined by stats, so it's much easier to calculate. Everybody gets like 35 points. Um, Initiative is like Rollmaster Classic, 2d10 plus quickness. They do the short, long action the same way. Um, but one of the things I don't like about them is in Rollmaster 2, you have certain special weapons that they say use like the longsword table, but do a negative 25 versus chainmail. All the weapons kind of do that in Rollmaster Express. It's my one downside. But other than that, it's Rollmaster Classic and just chopped down and simpler. It's way easier to if you can come across a copy of it. That's the way to if you want to dip your toe into Rollmaster. That's the way to play it. I think the first time, much easier
Okay.
to run. And then there's MERP. MERP is great. Obviously, like I said, I've ran MERP. It's got some differences. You get a class bonus per level for a lot of skills. So whereas like fighters in Rollmaster, you get a bonus per level to attack, and spellcasters gets a bonus level to cast. That's pretty much the only class bonus per level in
Okay.
Rollmaster. But in MERP, you get it for every skill.
Ah, okay. So he was correct that he could add skill
Yeah, you
ranks
would.
for every.
Well, this is a little different, but you would get like a plus 15 to your roll or plus 5 to your roll for every level you make. In
Okay.
addition, you get to get skill ranks every level. And what you do in there is they've got each of the skills is categorized in in a number of categories. So that there's like weapon skills, armor skills, um, things like that. And each skill, rather than being individual, is kind of falls under a category. And then depending on your class, you get X number of ranks per level to spend in that grouping. So you might get X number of armor skills, X number of weapon skills, X number of of skills for these static maneuvers that are grouped under this bank, and then you can spend as many as you want in under that group per level. That's why he's saying it doesn't remember one per level because like you might get three in armor to spend on any way you want per level, rather than having a cost that's separate for each skill and just a pool of development points to spend, that's how they do it. It's going to be you're going to be tied to that group. Now you can spend one point, so to speak, a rank outside of there, but it's like a conversion. It's like 4 ranks per every one outside of there. It kind of gets complicated, but it's really intended for you to get X percent or X number of ranks in that group of skills to spend per level based on your profession. So that's why he remembered it differently because that's how it's done. They simplified a lot of charts. They always use a table for static maneuvers, but a lot of weapon charts and crit charts are consolidated, so to speak. They have simplified an initiative. But they still have phased initiatives, spells, missiles, move, melee, movement maneuvers, and static maneuvers. Um, it's real simple initiative. The highest movement maneuver bonus goes first in melee. There you go. Um, Spells only take 1 round to cast in MERP, and this is kind of neat. But so what they do is that you only take 1 round to cast, but you can prep additional rounds uh, to affect your roll. And if you don't prep any rounds, you get a -30 to your spell casting roll, and that goes down with every round you prep. So instead of trying to do this, it takes 3 to cast, they just go ahead and kind of put the spell failure penalty in there to start with and let you decide what to do. But it's its own system. It's simpler than Rollmaster because of a lot of that consolidation and because of the way they kind of guide you by saying, hey, if you're this profession, just spend any of these three on any of these handful of skills. Spend any of those 4 points that you get on any of these handful of skills instead of having to take you through variable costs and everything like that. I kind of like the
Okay.
variable costs, but I mean, it's whatever makes most sense in your head. It may be whatever, however your mind works. You might find one simpler than the other. I think that one also you have, if I remember, you have in Merc, yeah, you have racial modifiers to your skills as well. So not just racial modifiers to your stats, but you also get bonuses to say climbing
Okay.
or something like that based on your race. And then you've got Against the Dark Master, which we know is kind of that generic clone of Mert. Um, it's got much simpler skill resolution. The tables are simplified even more, which it may not affect the game that much. Me being an old grognard, I probably am like, I want 50 different results on my tables. I want all that extra stuff. But it allows them to cut down on the text in the tables and the different things that go through. Um, this is what they really, really, I think they're the only ones that fixed that resistance roll problem we were talking about with spells, and that the way they do it is that um, you're saving the target that the defender needs to roll on their resistance roll is based on the spellcaster's roll. So you would roll to cast your spell. Depending on what you roll, it'll give you a number. That's the target they have to hit on their resistance roll to resist. And then the defender gets a flat bonus to all their resistance rolls based on their level that goes up every level. I like this better because you don't have to roll against 2 tables, number one. Reference that chart, but also because the character, it's that save modifier is a flat modifier that's pre-calculated. It's set on the character sheet. You just look at it when you roll, right? Rather than having to do all this, 2 different variables for every roll. And that's if I were going to play Rollmaster and I really wanted to fix it, that's the way I'd do something similar like that, where I'd do away with maybe the I might just if I haven't looked to see if they're compatible, I might just use the tables from Against the Dark Master,
Yeah.
because that's a way simpler system. Um, it's similar in MERP to its skill advancement. It uses the same type of system where their skills are grouped together in certain categories, and then you get X number of ranks per category depending on your profession.
Mhm.
Um, and the initiative is a little. It's kind of like our Rollmaster 2 and a Rollmaster Classic. You have round phases, and I like that because, like I said, I like phases. I like a missile phase and everything. But rather than trying to assign a percentage of activity to everything completely, they kind of split every activity into either being a half or full action. which is essentially what they were trying to do with Rollmaster Classic anyway, when they went to that less than 50%, greater than 50%. And I think I like that because um, it's just a little bit easier to remember. Although one thing in the later versions of Rollmaster, like Classic, what they did is they at least give you like one box chart where it's like, here's all the different actions and the percentage they take. So
Hmm. Okay.
I think if you're not caught up on honestly, if you're not caught up on all of the detailed spell failure charts and things like that against the Dark Masters, is probably is a really good system to use and probably they fix a lot of issues. I haven't tried Rollmaster Unified, which is the new one coming out. I haven't even read it, but maybe they do a lot of good stuff in that. So
Okay. Well, I
those
guess
are the
it's
ones I'm familiar with.
all right.
I've looked at Space
Well, I guess
Master. It's
we kind of, yeah, I
essentially
haven't looked at, I've
Rollmaster
never looked at,
2.
yeah, I've
It's
never looked at
Rollmaster
Space
2
Master.
with a different environment. It looks good, but I'm not that familiar with a lot of the other, you know, different genre systems. So,
Yeah. So I guess we kind of answered his question, then just went right on into
yeah.
adjacent
Sorry.
games. That's fine. That's great. It's great.
Yeah, because that kind of just led me right in there. I didn't mean to. I
No, that's
hope you didn't
great.
have any questions that I just went right past.
Yeah. I don't know. Let me see. Yeah, we re-listened to the message, and I think we answered his questions. And of course, we just segued into,
Yeah, I
you know,
went right
all
into.
yeah, went into the rest of the stuff. So yeah, like we'd mentioned before, never played in Shadow World. We've not played Space Master, and I'm sure there's people. And if you go back and listen to Barry and Jason and Jason Connerly's podcast, I think they mentioned a lot of adjacent Rollmaster adjacent type of games and other versions of Rollmaster. So you
Hmm.
could take a look at that. We were just kind of focusing on RM2 really, right? And
Yeah.
what Darkfluid is familiar with, and what we're probably going to be playing in GM Shadows Play by Post. So yeah, I think that
Yeah.
covers it. Unless you have any
Yeah.
last words or last hints to jump into
I would
Rollmaster.
say, I mean, I know there's several VTT modules out there. I'm not sure what all versions. This is a game where if the charts are all in there, it could really speed things up in some cases.
Mhm.
But there's also a tool out there called ERA that is for several versions of Rollmaster. They have modules I think they sell for each one. And I think there's a module for Against the Dark Master too, that has character creation built into it to try and speed some of that up for you. I think they do some other things in there like combat tracking and things like that that may or may not be useful to you depending on what you do. But I think it could be useful to some people for character creation. This is one of those games where having a good spreadsheet type character sheet or some tool like ERA is it could be helpful when putting together the character. And that's one of the other things I'll say about Against the Dark Master. It's a benefit for it that is that they have done a lot of work on a lot of tools for it as well. And there's a lot of supplemental game aids that they're putting out for Against the Dark Master, and I think it's really good to see them doing that because that's a good reason to play with that system as well with the continued development. I'm sure they're doing new things for Rollmaster Unified. I'm not that familiar with it, so um, all systems that are still being supported in a lot of ways, even if it's by the fan community and tools to help you out there.
All right. Wow, I think we've covered it.
Most of it. I'll also say that we didn't go into a lot of it. There's a lot for Rollmaster 2 and the others. There's a lot of Rollmaster companions out there
Yeah.
that, I mean, a lot of additional rules to the system if you want new classes, new skills, new spell lists, things like that. You can really dig deep to
Whole books on Essence and
yeah,
others.
things
Yeah.
you can grab to help build your custom world and campaign, little things you can grab to add and enhance that, like any of these systems that's been well supported for a while. So,
Well,
you know,
cool.
it's a really widely supported system with a lot of supplements that if you can track them down.
Well, good. Yeah, we'll put some links in the show notes, especially that character creator and things like that. But thank you so much, Dark Fluid, for joining me in this series and teaching me how to play Rollmaster. We've definitely got some feedback, at least through the Discord, and got that great call from Joe Richter of Hindsightless. So I'll put a link to his show. You should go check it out. It's really fun. And I think that's about it. So I guess the next thing we do, you'll have to run some Rollmaster or MERP for us on the channel, on the YouTube channel, or somehow. Anyway,
I
thanks so
hope
much
this helps
again.
you completing your character, gives you a better
Yeah,
understanding
I
when you
need to
go
get
to.
on that. Yeah, it definitely gives me better understanding and now kind of what approach I can take. So I'm in the development points phase. So I, assigned my points and looked at the max that they can become, and I have some more pointers on what to do and what to choose. So yeah, I think it was what was it, like an enhancement? Was it an essence guy? I think it was an essence guy.
Yeah, I think you're an essence caster. I think you should.
The one that couldn't wear armor, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So reading spell lists is going to be a fun part for you to get to choose what you're
Yeah,
developing.
what I'm developing. Okay. Well, great. Thank you so much, Darkfluid. So I'd like to
Yeah.
thank my listeners. If you have any comments, send us some feedback like Joe did. You can send that to you could to geomologist@gmail.com. You can send me a message there or type it out, text message. You can DM me as well on various audio through the Audio Dungeon Discord, but a lot of other Discords. You'll find me on the Audio Dungeon Discord and others, or you can leave a message on SpeakPipe. And I'll also link, if you don't want to talk to me, you can leave a message for Darkfluid, and I'll link his uh, through the Silver Key. Is
It's
that
a yeah, Substack, the Silver Key.
Silver Key? I'll put that in the show notes as well. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and talk to you soon.